My new sister-in-law took my baby without permission during their wedding. Now she's shocked that I pressed charges. I've been married to my husband, Lucas, for the past 5 years. We met through a blind date set up by our mutual friends. I have to admit, I was a bit skeptical about the whole idea of a blind date at first. The thought of meeting someone I knew nothing about and trying to make a connection seemed daunting. But from the moment I met Lucas, there was something between us that just clicked. What started as a casual evening turned into something much more significant. As we began spending more time together, it became clear that we shared a connection that went beyond the surface. There was a natural ease in our conversations, a comfort in each other's presence, and a growing list of things we found in common. It didn't take long for both of us to realize that what we had was special. Our relationship quickly grew from casual outings to something deeper and more meaningful. We started talking about our hopes, dreams, and the future we wanted to build together. Eventually, after months and months of dating, we decided to take the next step and got married. Surrounded by our closest family and friends, we pledged our lives to each other in a heartfelt ceremony. Our wedding day was filled with so much love and joy. I can still recall every detail of the day, the look in Lucas's eyes as I walked down the aisle, his brother, Kyle, cheering us on as his best man, the laughter of our family and friends, and the feeling of pure happiness that enveloped us. That day truly stands as one of the happiest days of my life, a moment when everything felt right, and the love we had for each other was celebrated in the most beautiful way. Right from the start, both Lucas and I had always wanted children. From the early days of our relationship, we had discussed becoming parents, and it was a dream we both shared deeply. We imagined a future filled with the sounds of little feet running through the house, the laughter of children filling the rooms, and the joy of nurturing and guiding a new life together. However, as much as we longed for it, the journey to parenthood turned out to be much more challenging than we ever anticipated. For what felt like an eternity, we tried everything to get pregnant but were unsuccessful. We meticulously tracked my ovulation, planning every aspect with hope and anticipation. We made significant lifestyle changes. Both of us gave up drinking and smoking, habits we knew could affect our chances. We committed to regular exercise, becoming almost religious in our approach to fitness. We also took a hard look at our diet, making sure we were eating all the right things to create the best possible conditions for conception. But despite all our efforts, the result was always the same. Month after month, we were met with disappointment. We couldn't understand why it wasn't happening for us when we were doing everything right. Eventually, we decided to seek medical advice. We both got thoroughly checked out, hoping for some kind of explanation or solution. But when the results came back, the doctors told us that there was nothing wrong with either of us. They said everything looked perfectly normal, and that sometimes, it just takes time. Their advice was to be patient and trust that the process would work someday. Hearing that was both a relief and a source of frustration. On one hand, it was comforting to know that there wasn't an underlying issue preventing us from conceiving. On the other hand, being told to just wait and see felt so uncertain. Patience, as they say, is a virtue, but it's not an easy one to practice when you're waiting for something you want so desperately. Lucas and I continued to dream about the day I would finally see that positive pregnancy test and how we would celebrate that moment. As luck would have it, last year, our patience finally paid off. It started with me missing my period, which wasn't entirely unusual, but then I began to feel sick in the mornings. At first, I didn't think much of it. Life was busy, and I just brushed it off as stress or maybe a little bug. But then, my best friend Vivian heard about my symptoms. She immediately sensed something I hadn't dared to believe yet and rushed over to my place with a handful of pregnancy tests. When she showed up at my door with those kits, my heart started racing. Could this really be happening? As I ripped open the first kit, both Vivian and I were shaking with excitement. I was already crying, the mere thought of finally being pregnant overwhelming me with hope and joy. And then, it happened. The test confirmed it, I was pregnant. I remember staring at those 2 lines in disbelief. Vivian and I started jumping up and down in joy, screaming and hugging each other as the realization hit us. We couldn't believe our eyes. After all the months of waiting and hoping, the moment had finally arrived. That evening, I knew I wanted to make the moment just as special for Lucas. My husband had been on this journey with me every step of the way, and I wanted the news to be a memory we would cherish forever. With Vivian's help, I planned a sweet little surprise. We decorated the living room with balloons and bought a small cake to celebrate the news. It was simple but perfect. When Lucas came home from work that night, he was immediately puzzled by the festive decorations. He laughed, asking me if I had somehow mixed up the dates and thought it was his birthday. I just stood there, smiling, trying to contain my excitement. Instead of answering him, I simply handed him the pregnancy test. It took a second for him to fully register what he was holding. But then, I saw the realization dawn in his eyes. His expression changed from confusion to shock, and then to pure, unbridled joy. He yelled in excitement, and before I knew it, he had swept me off my feet and was spinning me around in a hug. After everything we had been through, all the waiting and hoping, we finally had the answer we had been longing for: we were going to be parents. Throughout my pregnancy, after every appointment with my gynecologist, I would come back home, beaming with joy, clutching the latest ultrasound picture of our little baby. I would immediately place them on the fridge with our magnets, creating a growing collage of our journey. Every time I walked by, I'd glance at the images, and it would fill my heart with so much happiness, a constant reminder that our little Cece was growing and thriving. Lucas and I spent a lot of time preparing for our daughter's arrival. We took on the task of decorating the nursery together, carefully selecting colors, furniture, and little decorations that would make it a warm and loving space for our baby. We went shopping for baby clothes, each tiny outfit a testament to the excitement and love we already felt for her. We also picked out strollers, car seats, and all the other essentials we'd need. Every decision was made with so much care and thought, imagining how it would all come together when Cece finally arrived. After reaching the 12-week mark, which felt like a significant milestone, Lucas and I decided it was time to share the news with our families. We wanted to do it in a way that felt special and personal, so we planned a small dinner at our place. We invited only our closest family members, under the pretext of a casual gathering. No one had any idea what was coming, and we were so excited to see their reactions. The evening of dinner arrived, and the house was filled with the warmth and chatter of family. As I looked around, I noticed that Lucas's younger brother, Kyle, had arrived with his girlfriend. I was a little surprised, to be honest. We had specifically mentioned that this was going to be a gathering of family members only, and it threw me off that he had brought a random woman without checking with us first. But knowing Kyle and his spontaneous nature, we decided not to make a fuss about it and just let it go. Kyle introduced his girlfriend, Jasmine, to everyone at the dinner. She was a divorcee with a child from her previous marriage, and it was obvious that she was significantly older than Kyle. They had apparently met at the gym recently and hit it off. Throughout the evening, both Kyle and Jasmine kept behaving like horny, little teenagers. They kept grabbing each other, kissing, and making noises that were hard to ignore, especially in front of everyone. It was more than a little uncomfortable, and I could sense that I wasn't the only one who felt that way. Despite this awkwardness, I was determined not to let it derail the evening. As we all sat down for dinner, Lucas and I exchanged a glance, silently agreeing that it was time. We stood up, and Lucas cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. "We have something to share with you all," Lucas said, his voice full of excitement. With that, I brought out the collection of ultrasound pictures that I had been collecting. As I held them up for everyone to see, I announced with a smile, "We're pregnant." For a moment, there was silence as everyone looked at our faces, processing what we had just said. Then, the room exploded with joy. Everyone jumped up from their seats, rushing to hug us, congratulate us, and share in our happiness. The atmosphere was suddenly electric with excitement and love. Lucas's parents were especially thrilled. This was going to be their first grandchild, and I could see the pride and happiness shining in their eyes. They had known how hard we had been trying, and this news meant the world to them. My own mother was in tears as she hugged me tightly. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion as tears streamed down her face. I nodded, smiling through my own tears. "Yes, Mom. I'm more than okay." My brother and his wife hugged Lucas and me, expressing how thrilled they were that we were finally going to be parents. They couldn't wait to help us out and share tips for being first-time parents. I confessed how nervous I was and how I kept overthinking every decision. My brother reassured me that he felt the same way before my niece was born, and his wife nodded in agreement. In that moment, nothing else mattered but the love and support of our family. This was what Lucas and I had dreamed of, and now, surrounded by the people we cared about most, it was all coming true. The evening had been filled with so much joy, but there was one person who stood out like a sore thumb: Jasmine. While everyone else was celebrating and sharing in our happiness, Jasmine sat motionless in her chair, glaring at us with a look of unmistakable anger. Her reaction was so starkly different from everyone else's that it was impossible not to notice. I couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy about it. When Kyle came over to hug me, I took the opportunity to quietly ask him what was going on with Jasmine. I wondered if we had somehow offended her, though I couldn't think of anything that might have caused such a reaction. But Kyle just shrugged it off, telling me it wasn't a big deal. He seemed completely unconcerned, as if her behavior was something he was used to. As the evening progressed, we all moved to the living room to enjoy dessert and wine. Naturally, I refrained from drinking, and Lucas joined me in solidarity, choosing not to drink as well. We all settled in, and the conversation naturally turned to babies and pregnancy. I shared details about the nursery we had been putting together, feeling proud of the little space we were creating for Cece. Throughout all of this, Jasmine had remained silent, barely participating in the conversation. But then, out of nowhere, she suddenly spoke up, asking if she could see our nursery. Her request caught me a little off guard, but I didn't see any harm in it. After all, she was a parent herself, and I thought perhaps she might have some helpful suggestions or tips. So I nodded and told her she was welcome to take a look, and I escorted her to the nursery. As we entered the room, I watched her closely and noticed that she didn't seem impressed at all as she viewed the room. Instead, she started pointing out things she thought were wrong with our nursery. She criticized our choice of room, saying it was too well lit for a baby to sleep in, suggesting that we hadn't thought it through. I calmly explained that we were planning to install roll-up curtains to darken the room whenever the baby needed to sleep, but she barely acknowledged my response. Next, she had an opinion about why we had chosen to color the room yellow, instead of a more neutral color. I was taken aback and told her yellow is just a color and it had nothing to do with someone's gender anyway. Then, she turned her attention to the baby clothes we had neatly arranged in the drawers. She scoffed at them, remarking that her son had never liked clothes like these and that we should have consulted other parents before buying what she called cheap knockoff versions. Her tone was dismissive and condescending, and it took me by surprise. Up until that moment, I had been trying to be polite, assuming she might just be a bit blunt, but this crossed a line. I couldn't hold back anymore. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked her, unable to hide the frustration in my voice. Her words stung, especially after all the effort Lucas and I had put into making everything perfect for our baby. It was clear she had no intention of offering any constructive advice. Instead, it seemed like she was deliberately trying to undermine the happiness of the evening. Just as Jasmine was about to respond, my mother and mother-in-law walked into the nursery, their faces lighting up as they admired the room. They began to gush over how beautiful everything looked, and for a moment, their warmth and praise filled the room, softening the tension that had been building. However, I wasn't ready to let the issue with Jasmine slide. I turned back to her, repeating my question with a firm tone. "What exactly did you mean by that?" Both my mother and mother-in-law noticed that something was off. Sensing the unease, my mother asked me what was wrong. I didn't hesitate to explain how Jasmine had been criticizing the nursery and had even gone so far as to call the baby clothes we'd chosen cheap. Both of them were taken aback by this, clearly surprised that someone would be so openly critical, especially during such a special time. My mother-in-law laughed in disbelief and turned to Jasmine, asking, "Is this true?" Jasmine, seemingly caught off guard by the sudden attention, tried to downplay her earlier remarks. She claimed that she found the clothes too rough to the touch and that she was simply advising me to consider softer options. But my mother and mother-in-law weren't buying it. They both shook their heads and chuckled softly, pointing out to her that the clothes felt perfectly smooth to them. Jasmine then quickly tried to backtrack, insisting that as a mother, she knew better and that I should learn to keep an open mind and be willing to accept criticism. But before I could respond, my mother stepped in, her voice firm yet calm. "Well, we're mothers too," she said, "and we would never say something like that to her. You should know better than anyone how difficult it is to be a first-time mother." My mother-in-law joined in, backing me up as well. "This isn't your place to criticize, Jasmine," she said. "It's one thing to offer advice, but this isn't how you do it." Jasmine's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized she was outnumbered and out of line. She looked visibly offended but didn't have much to say in response. Instead, she stormed out of the nursery in a huff. I followed her out, wanting to make sure the situation didn't escalate further. Jasmine made her way to Kyle, who was still in the living room, chatting with the rest of the family. Without bothering to explain much, she announced that she wanted to go home. Kyle looked confused, but sensing her agitation, he didn't push the issue. He simply apologized to everyone, congratulated Lucas and me again on the pregnancy, and then left with Jasmine. Later on, Kyle reached out to both Lucas and me to apologize for Jasmine's behavior at our announcement party. He had found out about everything after my mother-in-law gave him a stern lecture for bringing Jasmine to such an important and intimate gathering. I knew this situation wasn't really Kyle's fault, so I forgave him without hesitation. He seemed genuinely concerned and wanted to clarify why Jasmine might have behaved so oddly. Kyle explained that Jasmine had experienced trauma related to pregnancy in the past. It turns out Jasmine got pregnant with her son when she was just 16 years old. Later, after marrying her husband, they had hoped to have more children but faced complications. After years of trying to get pregnant, the emotional strain took a significant toll on their mental health and eventually led to the breakdown of their marriage. According to Kyle, other women's pregnancies were still a sore spot for Jasmine, which might explain her negative reaction to our celebration. As a fellow woman, I felt bad for Jasmine. I could empathize with the pain and disappointment she must have gone through, and I understood that these experiences had left her with emotional scars. However, while I sympathized with her situation, I couldn't ignore the fact that her comments at our announcement party were inappropriate and hurtful. So, I decided that it would be best to maintain a healthy distance from her at future family gatherings, to protect the positive atmosphere I wanted to keep around our growing family. Kyle and Jasmine continued to date, and on the day I gave birth to Cece, Kyle called and asked Lucas if he could bring Jasmine over to see the baby. Although we had our doubts, Lucas and I begrudgingly agreed, hoping that perhaps things would be different this time. Unfortunately, this proved to be a mistake. As soon as Jasmine saw our baby, she immediately commented on how little hair our newborn had, suggesting that this was a sign her hair would be super thin as she grew up. Her words felt like a direct hit, and I could see the irritation on Lucas's face as well. This comment was another unnecessary and insensitive remark during what should have been a purely joyful moment. Kyle, sensing the tension in the room, didn't let Jasmine stay long. After offering their congratulations, they both quickly left. This year, Kyle surprised us all with the announcement of his wedding to Jasmine. The news was met with some mixed feelings, particularly from my mother-in-law. She was openly disappointed with Kyle's choice to marry Jasmine, having never wanted her to become a part of the family. It turns out that my mother-in-law and Jasmine had been clashing for months. Knowing my mother-in-law's usually warm and kind demeanor, I knew that Jasmine's behavior was likely the source of their ongoing tension. When Lucas called Kyle to discuss the sudden wedding, since he believed that this was happening a bit too fast, Kyle confessed to him that Jasmine was actually 4 months pregnant. Apparently Kyle had only discovered this 2 months prior and had kept it a secret as they didn't want to be judged before they got married. Kyle expressed that he wanted to marry Jasmine before the baby was born, which was understandable given their circumstances. However, during the actual preparations for the wedding, Jasmine threw a fit while trying on wedding dresses because she couldn't fit into any of them. She had gained weight during her pregnancy, which made it difficult for her to wear her dream dress. Kyle tried to convince her to wear something much more comfortable, but she was adamant about the dress. In the end, she demanded that Kyle change the wedding date. Originally, the wedding was planned to occur before the baby's arrival, but it was now pushed to a month after the baby was due so that Jasmine could have time to lose some of the weight she had gained. Despite the frustration that the change of plans might have caused, everyone understood that this was Jasmine and Kyle's special day, and they had every right to choose a date that made them feel comfortable. A month ago, Jasmine gave birth to her daughter, and Lucas and I had even gone to the hospital to congratulate her and Kyle about the baby. For their approaching wedding, Lucas was going to be Kyle's best man. We were not comfortable leaving Cece behind for the entire day, so we decided to take our daughter with us. My mother-in-law and I discussed it, and we agreed that we could handle taking care of Cece between us. I did try looking into hiring a babysitter for the hotel room at first, but with the rising concerns about child abductions, I felt more comfortable having a known family member look after Cece instead. During the reception, I was planning not to drink and would retire early to our room anyway, ensuring Cece was well cared for throughout the evening. However, about a week before the wedding, Jasmine called me. During our conversation, Jasmine asked me if I would be bringing Cece to the wedding. I confirmed that I would and went on to share our plan to manage Cece's care throughout the evening. To my surprise, Jasmine interrupted me and said she didn't want Cece at the wedding. I was taken aback and asked her why. Jasmine told me that she only wanted her miracle baby to be the center of attention and that having Cece there would divert attention away from her. I tried to explain that everyone had already met Cece and that no one could ever take any attention away from her on her wedding day. But Jasmine was insistent, and she became increasingly upset. She told me that if I couldn't respect her boundaries, then I wasn't welcome at the wedding. The situation eventually escalated into a huge argument involving Jasmine, Kyle, Lucas, and my mother-in-law. Kyle reached out to me, apologizing for Jasmine's behavior and clarifying that I was still very much invited to the wedding. He urged me not to take Jasmine's words too seriously and assured me that I was free to bring Cece. I was so pissed at Jasmine that I had half a mind to refuse to go to their wedding, but I knew that it was important to support Lucas and be there for his brother's wedding. So, I decided to put my feelings aside and go to the wedding, focusing on making the best of the situation for the sake of family harmony. This now brings us to the situation that occurred. During Kyle's and Jasmine's ceremony, a few relatives couldn't help but admire Cece, cooing over her and noting how cute she looked. Jasmine would occasionally shoot me a disapproving glance whenever our eyes met. It was clear that she still hated the fact that I had brought Cece to her wedding, even though her baby was clearly the star of the event and I was making no effort to steal the spotlight. When the celebration moved on to the reception area, my mother-in-law, Lucas, and I took turns looking after Cece in our hotel room, just as we had planned. Although my mother-in-law got a bit tipsy as the evening progressed, Lucas and I abstained from drinking completely, so we could focus on taking care of Cece. In the middle of the reception, I noticed my mother-in-law, who was supposed to be with Cece at that moment, coming down to our hotel room, frantically searching for me. Something about her demeanor made my heart race. I rushed over to her to find out what was wrong, and Lucas, sensing that something was amiss, followed closely behind. My mother-in-law's voice trembled as she whispered that Cece was missing. My heart felt like it had dropped to the floor. Lucas asked her what she meant by missing since he had just left our daughter in her care in the room. This is when my mother-in-law confessed that Jasmine had come into the room shortly after he had left. Both of them were talking, and at one point, my mother-in-law had to use the washroom, but when she came out, both Cece and Jasmine were gone. Confused, both Lucas and I immediately sought out Kyle, asking him where Jasmine was and why would she even do something like this. Kyle was taken aback by the whole thing as well. Amid the celebrations and the crowd, we alerted the hotel staff to search for both Cece and Jasmine. The staff sprang into action immediately, but despite their efforts, there was no sign of either of them, even after an hour. This is why I felt compelled to call the police. Kyle tried to reassure me that I should not involve the authorities, insisting that Jasmine would not do anything to harm Cece, but my fear and anxiety were overwhelming. The idea that Cece was missing with Jasmine, who had already shown troubling behavior, was unbearable. When the police arrived, we provided statements and described the situation, all while trying to keep our composure. The wedding guests also began to notice something was wrong, and the atmosphere shifted from celebration to concern. Then, a hotel staff member arrived, announcing that Cece and Jasmine had been found in the back of the hotel. We rushed out with him, my heart pounding with dread. There, we saw Jasmine sitting in a chair, holding Cece in one arm and smoking in the other hand. Her own baby was also in a baby carrier next to her. I couldn't contain my tears as I rushed to grab Cece from Jasmine and checked on her. Lucas started yelling at Jasmine, demanding to know why she had taken Cece without informing anyone. Jasmine's response was that she simply wanted to help out my mother-in-law and she was our family now anyway. My mother-in-law, now fully sober and frantic, screamed at Jasmine, explaining that Jasmine had no right to take our daughter without our permission and that she had knowingly disappeared when mother-in-law was in the washroom. Jasmine simply smirked as she turned to look at me, remarking that if I was so concerned about my daughter, perhaps I should have listened to her request and not brought her to the wedding. I was stunned, realizing then that she had in fact kidnapped my daughter deliberately. She wanted me to run around scared, searching for my daughter, just to scare me and teach me a lesson, hoping that I would back down the next time she demanded something from me. Kyle tried to pacify us, saying that perhaps this was all just a big misunderstanding. At this point, the police turned to me, asking if I still wanted to press charges. I looked at Jasmine's face and she had no apology or remorse for her actions. I wanted to teach her a lesson to never mess with me or my family again, so I decided to go ahead and press charges for kidnapping. Jasmine's eyes widened in disbelief as she protested, but the police took her into custody right there on the spot. Kyle tried to urge me to reconsider, but my mother-in-law told him that what his wife had done was unforgivable. Am I the a-hole for getting Jasmine arrested and making her spend her wedding day in jail? Update 1. Wow, I woke up to my notifications blowing up from Reddit. I have to say I still feel shaken after what Jasmine did to us. Last night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep properly, consumed with worry about my daughter's safety. Kyle has been calling and begging us to drop the charges against Jasmine, insisting that she didn't really mean any harm. Update 2. It's been a few weeks since my last update. Since the charges were filed, there wasn't much I could do to help Jasmine, despite Kyle's relentless pleas. The evidence against her is compelling. The hotel CCTV footage clearly shows her taking Cece out of the room, and Mill has given a statement confirming that Jasmine took Cece without her knowledge. Jasmine's case will proceed, with a hearing scheduled for next week. Meanwhile, Lucas and I had a heated argument with Kyle recently. He kept blaming us for putting his poor wife in jail and lamented how this was going to destroy her life. Lucas questioned Kyle how he would feel if someone had taken his baby away and left without informing anyone. Kyle had no answers to that. Both Lucas and I have decided to cut him off for the time being since we are tired of his refusal to see how toxic his partner is. The rest of the family is just as disappointed in Jasmine and fully supports us. Update 3. During the hearing, Jasmine pleaded guilty to all the charges. Her legal counsel argued on behalf of her that this was an isolated incident and that she was just very emotional already since it was her wedding day, hence she acted irrationally. Ultimately, the judge sentenced her to community service and mandatory counseling since this was her first offense. After this, Jasmine did reach out to both me and Lucas with an apology, but we refused to forgive her. The damage has already been done. No one can ever trust Jasmine after what she did to my daughter. Since the incident, both mother-in-law and father-in-law have cut off Kyle as well and have refused to take his calls.